Hello all, we'll be waiting just a couple minutes and then we'll get started. If you take this opportunity to go ahead and make sure your Zoom name is accurate and that your video and audio settings are set to go. Again, we'll start in just a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, hello and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for the second Technical Advisory Group meeting for Washington State Ferries Fauntleroy Terminal Trestle and Transfer Span Replacement Project. I'm Liz Faulkner, and today I'll be your facilitator for our meeting. A reminder that while we're used to these remote meetings at this point, many of us are still joining from home and appreciate your patience with any technical issues that may come up. Last reminder, this meeting is being recorded and the video will be available to TAG members. Before we get started, just a few quick Zoom reminders. Please go ahead and check to see your name shows up correctly and update using the more arrow or by clicking on your image and choosing rename. Please remember to keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. And we're going to try and keep the chat open today. And if you have any technical questions, you can chat directly with @tech support or call my colleague John at 402-972-7203. During the discussion parts of today's agenda, we'll be using the chat and raise hand tools. I see that one person is joining by phone, and you'll be able to raise your hand by pressing *9. Today's agenda is designed to help us meet our three main meeting objectives: to provide further discussion of the planning and environmental linkages study process, to give all of you, the members of the TAG, more context, to finalize the working charter for this advisory group, and to provide time for discussion and presentation of the preliminary purpose and need statement. As I mentioned last time, throughout the advisory group process, there'll be a number of different core project team members and technical subject matter experts from Washington State Ferries and the consultant team. In today's meeting, we have joining in a speaking role, Marcia Tolan, representing WSF's Environmental Stewardship and Sustainability Program. Hi, Marcia. Alec Williamson, Washington State Ferries Terminal Design Engineering Manager. Hello. And we also have a few other terrific members of the team joining who I'll ask to quickly wave hello. David Sowers, the Director of Terminal Engineering for Washington State Ferries. Hadley Rodero, Washington State Ferries Communications and Community Engagement Manager. And Doug Plater, the Consultant Team Project Manager. Hi, y'all. And now we'd love to know a little bit about who's here joining us today. So I'd ask if each of you could please enter into the chat box your name and title. And we'll give a minute here to see who's joining us. And then for the person on the phone, I'll ask you to introduce yourself in just a minute. Great, thank you. Great, so today we have some representatives from Vashon Island Fire and Rescue, from the Department of Ecology, from WDFW, Sharon Love from FHWA, King County Metro Service Planning. Philip Narte is our tribal liaison. Hi, Philip. Sorry, I missed you earlier. Sean Hoffman with FHWA also. Kitsap County Public Works. Washington State Transportation Commission. Seattle Department of Transportation. King County Wastewater Treatment Division. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Snoqualmie Indian Tribe. Seattle City Light. So thanks very much. We've got great representation. Many of you joined us at our first meeting, and I see a few new names here also. So please do reference the presentation materials we sent for the last meeting, and let us know in follow-up if there's any background information you'd like us to review. And with that, before we start the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to David Sowers to share a few thoughts.
Well, thank you, Liz. And before we get going, I want to start by sharing my thanks to all of you for participating in these advisory group meetings. I know you're obviously very busy. You've got lots on your plate, but I appreciate it. We've got a great turnout today, and lots of, I'm sure we'll have lots of good discussion. Last week, Patty Rubestello, our Assistant Secretary for Ferries, and I, with others on this call, hosted the Executive Advisory Group's first meeting, and kind of in that process reaffirmed both the complexities of this project and the collective interest in developing the project in a collaborative way. And that, you know, it was great to hear all the input from the executives and electeds. We actually had some opposing viewpoints come up in the course of that meeting, and it's always good to hear people's perspectives. So it was a very productive and certainly part of this advisory process. As Liz said earlier, we are going to talk today about the planning and environmental linkages process, the PEL process, and particularly the kind of milestone that we're reaching here soon, which is this preliminary purpose and needs statement. And that sort of sets this tone for then the next stages of this early process of looking at alternatives and then starting to select a preferred option. So this is an important step for us. We shared the purpose and needs statement with the Executive Advisory Group last week. And, you know, I'm not going to give it away, but, you know, a lot of it you have seen in some form or another in previous presentations, and certainly there shouldn't be any surprises, but I hope you'll look at that closely and talk about it with your groups. So with that, I'm going to have Marcia Tolan, who's our environmental lead for Washington State Ferries, kind of walk you through what that PEL process looks like.
Thank you, Dave. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm really glad that you could attend the meeting, and it's good to see so many familiar faces. You know, when this group met last month, we asked you what information you wanted to learn about as we launched the project and as the advisory group effort got underway. So one area of interest you shared was wanting to know more information about the planning and environmental linkages process, or PEL, or PEL as some say. So this is our starting place. Our team has shared links to both FHWA and DOT's PEL websites, which were sent to you via email today. And I'll be sharing a quick background about PEL, walking through how we expect alternatives would be developed and screened, and finally, how the work we're doing in PEL relates to the future environmental review process that many of you are very familiar with. You'll also see the links to both the DOT and the FHWA's PEL websites are also in the chat for an additional place for your reference. So the PEL study process is new to DOT, and from the TAG attendee poll last month at our first meeting, it seemed that it was new to many of you as well. Transportation agencies across the country have started using the PEL study approach for those projects that could benefit from early agency, public and tribal collaboration to help define the problems to be solved and any potential solutions that we could undertake ahead of the formal environmental review process. So we made the decision to use PEL for this project, given the community context and also the extremely unique natural and built environment setting of the terminal. We shared during the last meeting about replacing the Fauntleroy terminal, that it was one of the many recommended actions that was included in the 2040 long range plan that was released in 2019. So over the years of working with the communities on this and other planning efforts, WSF has heard various and differing perspectives from the communities served by the Triangle route and about how to address our aging terminal at Fauntleroy. So WSF determined a PEL approach would likely be beneficial in many ways, including early engagement with many and early work with all of you to better understand environmental constraints, opportunities to avoid impacting resources, and possibly to collaborate early on potential mitigation strategies. Once we made the decision to pursue PEL, we sought approval and partnership with federal agencies, and thanks to those to FHWA because they chose to partner with us and to help see us through the benefits of this approach for the project. Before we move on to how we're approaching the alternatives development process under PEL, Sharon, I'd like to ask, do you have anything you'd like to add here for the TAG members? And also if there are any attendees of the TAG meeting who have any questions about why we're using PEL?
I don't have anything, Marcia, but I'm happy to try and answer questions.
Great, thank you, Sharon.
Any questions from members, you can feel free to put them in the chat or use the raise hand function. Just another minute. Okay, with that, as it comes to mind, please feel free to reach out in the chat and share those, and always follow up after if there are other questions that come up. Marcia, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Liz. So we're expecting a 4-step study process to develop and screen alternatives between now and roughly the middle of 2023, as you can see in this bar scale type of schedule. One major benefit of this process is the opportunity for early, frequent, and meaningful chances for advisory group and public input as the project alternatives are identified and screened. So the first step we're calling early scoping, which we expect to take place between now and later this fall. Specifically, this step helps us to answer what problems should the project solve, which is the purpose and need statement. What alternatives should be considered, which is to identify the range of alternatives to analyze in the PEL study. And then how should potential alternatives be evaluated, which is when we develop screening criteria. And also what will occur during this step of the process is that we'll work with you to get your input, any comments and information related to the existing conditions assumptions that we'll be using in the screening process. I hope that you're noticing that some of the phrases that are used are very similar to what we encountered in the environmental review phase, because they are similar. And essentially what we're doing is some of the work now that's traditionally covered in the environmental review process that will occur later. We're also proposing a 2-level screening process, increasing detailed and comprehensive criteria that's applied to a decreasing number of concepts. The first level of screening alternatives, which will occur between later this year and spring or mid 2022, will include reviewing how the broad range of alternatives meet the purpose and need, and then whether there are any fatal flaws associated with specific alternatives, and then which alternatives should carry into level 2 screening. Also, during this step of the process, we'll work with you to confirm or provide additional information related to the existing condition assumptions that we'll be using in the second level screening process. So level 2 screening. The second level of screening here is expected to occur from spring to summer 2022 through early 2023, including review and analysis to help us answer how a refined set of alternatives meet detailed evaluation criteria that is based on the purpose and needs statement, and then which alternatives should be advanced for further analysis. This could include confirming whether we need to revisit anything or do additional analysis before moving forward. Then finally, we'll be excited when that time comes to prepare the PEL study report in 2023. It's expected for completion of that to be in the middle of that year. The report captures the recommended path forward, including which alternatives that we should carry into the environmental phase. And it will also include reference to the key technical data and the advisory group and public discussion that inform PEL study recommendations. And at that point, then the project will transition into the formal environmental review process. And that's when we'll closely work with FHWA to determine the next steps. And those steps include defining what carries forward from the PEL study, the appropriate level of environmental review, that is, whether it's going to be an environmental impact statement or environmental assessment, and then the timeline for next steps. So Liz, I'll turn it back to you now.
Great, thanks, Marcia. Terrific that you were able to cover that. I want to turn it back to members before we move on and see if there are additional questions that Marcia or Sharon can cover about the PEL process. And for the member who requested more information, if there's any other questions that come up. Okay, Marcia, you captured it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next section of our agenda here today is briefly to come back to the charter for the technical advisory group that we spoke about at the last meeting and confirm that with you. So in short, the role of the technical advisory group is to serve in an advisory role in collaboration with Washington State Ferries through sharing technical input, ideas, and information throughout the PEL study process. So these are at all the steps and elements Marcia just walked through. It's also to participate in regular and most likely virtual meetings between now and when we anticipate completing the PEL study process in mid-2023. These will likely continue to be 60 to 90 minutes in length. Meetings will be recorded for sharing with technical advisory group members. And as we did last time, we will provide the meeting presentations and summaries. So Allison O'Sullivan, I see a question here in the chat about copies of the presentations. Absolutely, those will be sent following the meeting. We'll also be posting the meeting presentations for all of the advisory groups, the most recent presentations, on our project website. And so that is a way for members of the general public to follow along the work of the advisory groups. The charter was included in the series of attachments that all members received on Friday. That email was sent from the Fauntleroy Terminal Project account, if you're looking for it. And in that email are several documents, the agenda and other materials for today, but also the charter. So we would like to formalize that so we have a shared understanding of our operating norms and our expectation around roles for this group moving forward. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to members to see if there are comments or questions around the charter at this time. Okay, And before we move to the next topic, just to reinforce again a concept we discussed last time around the work of the advisory groups and the overall community engagement in an iterative fashion. So for the technical advisory group, this means sharing information, allowing time for your discussion, seeking your input in follow-up and also in the meetings themselves, considering what we hear, engaging the community and executive advisory groups and general public, and always looping back with you and the other groups to share how we've used the information and what it means in terms of moving forward in the process. In short, the advisory groups are going to be doing more in-depth review, more detailed discussion and engagement, where the broader check-ins with the executive advisory group and public will happen at key milestones. Essentially, that continues to rinse and repeat again through all the steps and phases that Marcia offered earlier. So with that, we're going to move to the section of our agenda. We're doing pretty well on time, so we'll probably get out of here a bit early today, focused on the purpose and needs statement. Alec, I'd ask you to come on screen and we will move into the next section.
Great, thanks Liz. Hi everyone, again this is Alec Williamson. I'm the Design Engineering Manager with Washington State Ferries Terminal Engineering Department, and I'm responsible for managing the group that's delivering this hopefully fantastic project. So what I'm going to be going over primarily today is just a little bit of a purpose and need overview. The purpose and need is preliminary at this stage of the planning process, and so we're looking for input from you all on its contents, and so I'll just be reviewing with you where we're at so far right now in the process. So and again, I think Liz mentioned this, but the preliminary purpose and need statement was provided to you with the agenda last Friday in an email. So feel free to open that up and check that as you have time, and give us feedback. I guess right now we're gonna pause to give you all a second to look at this and absorb what it's saying. So again, if you, this is the summary of it, and there's a broader or more detailed version in an email that you received. So I guess we're just going to pause for a couple of minutes here. Okay, I think with that, hopefully you've all had a chance to at least take a quick, brief look at it. Again, this is just the start of the review of this, and we welcome your comments at any point in time as we move through this process. During the Pell process that Marcia talked about earlier, the preliminary purpose and need statement will be describing the transportation problems to be addressed, and it serves as the basis for our alternatives development and then the subsequent screening that we're going to be going through in the Pell process. So the overall purpose of the project is to maintain safe, reliable, and efficient service on State Route 160 between West Seattle, Vashon Island, Southworth, and communities on the Kitsap Peninsula and beyond, consistent with the travel and ridership needs. We shared last time how important this facility is to maintaining a critical transportation and economic link between those communities. So with regard to seismic and structural, today's terminal sits atop timber piles installed way back in 1957 and then more in 1984. So it's no surprise the facility is showing its age at this point in time. Many parts of the facility shown in this graphic are vulnerable to earthquakes and or due for replacement given their age. Our crews conduct regular inspections and in recent years have needed to replace individual piles as needed to keep the facility safe and operational. This makes a critical objective of the project to replace aging terminal structures to meet current seismic, storm, and tsunami design standards. And again, touching on sea level rise, this sea level rise is a problem that we will be facing in the coming century, and this terminal is no exception. As you can see in the photo here, during high tide, we already experience some debris that bang up against the underside of the trestle. That's only going to get worse. This trestle, this terminal is one of the lowest in our system. And so for all of those reasons, a big objective of this project is to raise the elevation of the terminal to accommodate future sea level rise. And then operational efficiency is another huge need and purpose of this project. Several factors at this terminal contribute to service delays, cause congestion on Fauntleroy Way, and prevent WSF from meeting its on-time performance goals, including that the terminal does not allow for simultaneous loading of vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles. So all of those functions have to happen separately in time to maintain a safety. So that obviously it takes more time to load our vessels as a result. The intersection configuration at the intersection of our terminal and Fauntleroy Way it's a very constrained street intersection. That constrains the efficient flow of vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians in and out of the terminal, and it requires the use of uniformed police officers as well. And we have a metro bus stop there just right outside the terminal on the street. So there's a lot going on there in a very small space. And then of course the single slip terminal serves two destinations, and those are often imbalanced in terms of the demand for each of our destinations. And we regularly see an exceedance of our toll booth and terminal holding capacity. So that requires the regular use of a shoulder holding lane on Fauntleroy Way, as you can see here in this photo. So kind of to summarize all of that, the project objective is to provide operational efficiencies that maintain or improve on-time performance while maintaining service levels defined for the route in the 2040 long-range plan. We also need to address safety and Americans with Disabilities Act issues, accessibility for pedestrians, vehicles, and bicycles. These aspects of the terminal configuration currently are not up to current standards. This presents risks to travelers. You can see here in the photo, we've got some unconventional loading, out of necessity configurations. So it does create some safety problems there, and this project, our aim is to improve safety. As we talked about, improving safety, and meeting ADA accessibility requirements for all users is a goal of the project. And then finally, here, as far as purpose and need focused, we do need to accommodate ridership that's forecasted in our 2040 long-range plan. And, you know, as you can see in this chart, we're expecting increases of between 25 and 65% for walk-on and bike passengers, and then increases of between 13 and 19% for vehicles, depending on the two routes. And so some pretty big increases, and we've got to accommodate those increases with this new facility. And then we've got some ancillary goals related to this project that are very important to us that we have to consider as we move through the development of alternatives and do our screening. So I'll just kind of let you read through those. You know, on-time performance, electrification is coming, and we need to accommodate that. And then sustainability, sustaining modes of travel, walk-on bikes, and then multimodal connections is really important to us because we do believe that in order to accomplish those expected increases in use of our routes, multimodal connections are going to be really important for that. And then we also want to foster social equity and community values, minimize impacts to the built and natural environment. And then we have to be looking at alternatives that are technically and economically feasible for WSF to construct, operate, and maintain for the long term. Okay, and I think with that, I'm turning it over to Hadley for a little bit more conversation about all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Alec. So we've been doing a lot of talking at you for the beginning of this meeting, and this is really the time that we want to open it up and have a conversation with all of you about your thoughts about this purpose and need statement. This is sort of the foundational document of the project and the first step, as Marcia outlined at the beginning, and beginning our Pell study. And it's what we're going to be using as we start to develop alternatives. So we'd like to hear your thoughts, and the questions are on the slide here, but feel free to ask us anything or make any comments that you've thought of during this whole first half of the meeting. Do you have any thoughts on the core purpose and need for the project? Is there anything missing that we should consider adding? And what are your thoughts about those project goals that Alec talked about just here at the end and that are on the second page of the purpose and need that we emailed you, the kind of ancillary goals of the project? So feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat if you want to share. And if you have any thoughts or questions about the purpose and need and what it's for or how it's going to be used, anything like that. Anybody have any comments? No. We're also going to let you have a few weeks to look at this. I know some of you may want to share it with others in on your staff or in your agencies and get broader feedback on the purpose and needs. So this isn't your only chance to weigh in, but we would, love any feedback or any conversation among you on where you think we're heading. We're going to be sharing this with our community advisory group tomorrow night. And so getting the first round of community input on this purpose and need statement. And we also shared it with our executive advisory group last week and got their initial comments, and we invited them to share additional thoughts by email. So those of you who have others participating in the project, you could speak with them as well and share thoughts. Any questions or comments on the purpose and need? It'd be helpful to hear too if you, those of you who may be considering wanting to take some more time with this document, is there anybody who feels like they're okay with it as is right now and doesn't need to see it again? Or anyone who wants to speak up and say, well, there's something that you're kind of thinking you might want to share with us later? That would be helpful too, so we don't take too much of your future meeting time with this document if everybody's good with it as is. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Great. So I see some comments in the chat. So Jennifer is saying that the purpose and need looks thorough enough for her purposes. So that's great. That's really helpful to know. One of our goals here is we're in our first couple meetings is feeling out how many times, should we have a topic open for discussion, or how quickly do you want to move as a group? I know some of you are coming at this project brand new, and some of you have been involved in previous phases or in similar projects. And then Penny is asking where to find the 2040 long range plan. So Ray, I'm going to put you on the spot. Ray Deerdorf from our planning department, if you could post the link to that plan in the chat. Oh, there, John beat you to it. So in the chat is the link to Washington State Ferries 2040 long range plan for those of you who want to read that background. So one comment too in the chat is that Penny's saying she's curious about the goal to foster social equity and community values. She thinks that's pretty broad, but that's good. Marcia, do you have any comments on that, or why that was included in the purpose and need?
I think it has a lot to do with some of our previous work and how Ferries works overall with the communities we serve. But there was an earlier group, the Triangle group that worked on, which involved all three of the communities that worked on a proposed schedule, which was in effect for a while and changed up a bit with with COVID. But I think it has a lot to do with honoring the comments from the stakeholders and those who live and work in those communities, and use those routes with how their needs of everyday commuting.
Thanks, Marcia. Ben, you have a comment? You have your hand raised?
Sure. Thanks very much. Hopefully you can hear me. I think my one comment, because we looked over this since it came at the executive group last week, the second to last bullet for goals. So minimize impacts to the built and natural environment, and that contains legions. There's a lot of natural environment in the area, both over water and watersheds and park facilities, a lot of built environment, and much of it operated, maintained by Seattle Department of Transportation. They're even called out the intersection in Fauntleroy Way. So there's a lot, there's a lot in there. And I think also, how do you balance between the two? Like, where do you balance impacts to the natural environment versus impacts to the built environment? So good luck. But yeah, that captures it. But there's just a lot right there, even in that one bullet of goals.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Some of these are quite broad, and some of them are something that doesn't just apply to Fauntleroy project, but applies to pretty much anything that we would do as an agency.
And also I'd say that, this is a preliminary purpose and need statement, and we welcome the wisdom of your feedback. For many of you have worked with several projects and understand a bit about how goals as part of a project can work and function, and what practicality and feasibility we can apply to them.
Yeah, if anybody has any language that you'd like to suggest that would make that a little more specific or tailored to the project, or to add to it, we'd be all ears. Any other comments about these goals while Liz has them up on the screen here? Okay, well, as I said, this is not your only chance to weigh in. You all have this document in email, and we'll send it again when we send out the meeting follow-up and the summary of today's meeting. And if you want to take a little bit of time to look at it and provide comments, we're open to that, and just ask that you get us comments by the end of August. That would be really helpful, so we have a chance to incorporate the comments and reflect on them, along with what we heard from our executive advisory group and what we'll hear tomorrow night for the community advisory group. And then we can share back with you all in the early fall this revised purpose and need statement if any changes are made, or discuss any of the comments at our next meeting.
Hadley, if
Yeah.
you don't, could you go back one slide? I just wanted to reflect really quickly on what Ben said, because I thought it was a really important point. And, you know, I think that what comes to mind, Ben, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly, is you know, there's going to be some trade-offs, big trade-offs, a lot of trade-offs, and so maybe something along the lines of balancing the impacts between the built and natural environment, or you know, something along those lines. Is that what you were getting at?
Where's my unmute? Yeah, or just, yeah, if, balancing is part of it, or quantifying. Yeah, I mean, theory shouldn't have to be a trade-off, but impact should be minimized to both, not like we'll preserve the natural environment by making huge impacts to the built environment. So trade-off is part of it. Yeah. And I think also it involves, and I think this is something we've been thinking about, and I think we'll see as this process continues, what's the scope of this project? Like, is it this footprint near and on the water in Fauntleroy, or is the scope bigger if the impacts are bigger? So I think that's part of it as well.
Thank you.
That's helpful. And then just to clarify where we're asking for comments, the point person or the contact, if you could just send those to the project email address, which is the email that we've been sending out the meeting materials for today's meeting. Several of us have access to that email inbox, and that's sort of the easiest way to collect feedback from this group. It's there on the slide. Perfect timing at the bottom, Fauntleroy term proj@washdot.wa.gov. And you can send your comments to that inbox, and you feel free to copy any one of us on that if you have questions directly, or we'll route it around to Marcia and Alec and the rest of the project team, and make sure all the comments get incorporated and get discussed among our team. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you, Liz, for the closing comments, wrapping up the meeting.
Terrific. So in looking forward in terms of next steps, we're really hoping to be able to offer an opportunity to all of you, and in fact, all of the advisory groups, to join us for a project site tour, of course, in compliance with COVID-19 guidance. We're expecting the next meeting of the TAG to occur in early fall and be focused on follow-up from today, as Hadley just said. Hearing not just what we've heard from all of you and sharing that, but from the other advisory groups as well on the preliminary purpose and need. We also hope to start the discussion of the screening process and screening criteria at the next meeting. And finally, we expect that broad community engagement will occur later this fall on the topics, those that we're covering in depth with you and the other advisory groups between now and then. So before we close, any final questions or feedback to share before we adjourn the meeting? We'll leave you one last opening here. There's one question here in the chat from Allison. When is the next EAG meeting? The next EAG meeting has not been scheduled yet, but is also expected to occur in the fall, following the next round of technical and community advisory group meetings. Any other questions or feedback before we close? Great. Okay, and so with that, I hope you all enjoy 30 minutes back in your schedule. And we look forward to hearing your comments and questions at any time. And as we shared earlier, we'll be following up with both the presentation PowerPoint slides you saw today, as well as a summary after the meeting. And have a terrific Tuesday and great summer until we see you again in the fall.
Thanks. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.